Okay, our final major biomolecule that we have is nucleic acids, and we will have a large portion of the course later on to talk about genetics. So for now, we're just going to kind of quickly review the basic structure of a nucleic acid and then move forward from there. And so this is not really too in-depth, and also because our focus is sort of more on nutrition right now, we are just going to look at nucleic acids briefly because really they don't have any kind of dietary content for us. So nucleic acids, hopefully you remember, are the building blocks of DNA and RNA, which are the sources of genetic information. So you have chromosomes in your cell made of DNA. These chromosomes pass from parent to offspring. So while these do not have a dietary function for us, they are extraordinarily important because they are what make us related to our family members. Now, probably then the most important function of a nucleic acid is to sort of control the production of amino acids and therefore proteins, which, as we have seen, is really, really important for living things. So essentially, DNA carries the information for how to make a protein, and that's the connection that we'll explore later in the course. Now, nucleic acid is made up of simple units called nucleotides. And a nucleotide, just like these other organic compounds we've learned, is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but also every nucleotide involves some nitrogen and involves some phosphorus. Now, every nucleotide has a 3-part structure. There is always a 5-carbon sugar that serves as the base structure. We call this a pentose ring, like a pentagon, right? It's got 5 sides to it. We also then have some sort of nitrogen base here in green, which can vary, and we'll come back to those in just a minute. Notice that's where the nitrogen comes in. And then we also will have a phosphate group attached to that sugar, and that's where that phosphorus comes in. Now, there are 2 possible pentose sugars that we can use. We can see ribose sugar here, or we can see deoxyribose. And so I kind of hope that I don't have to review this with you, but DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. So you might be able to guess one of the big differences. It's these sugars, right? For DNA, we're going to see deoxyribose, deoxyribonucleic acid, and for RNA, we're going to see ribose, ribonucleic acid. Now notice the difference. The only difference is right here. There is 1 less oxygen in deoxyribose. Get it? Now the name makes sense, right? Deoxy, to take away oxygen. So deoxyribose has 1 less oxygen, and that's the only difference between these 2 sugars, ribose and deoxyribose. Now there are then 5 possible nitrogen or nitrogenous bases that we can see as part of a nucleotide. These are adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, and uracil. You might remember we usually just abbreviate these by their first letter, so A, T, G, C, and U. And we actually have 2 groups of these based on their general structure. So if you notice here, adenine and guanine have a very similar structure to each other. They're double ringed here. So kind of got 1 ring and a second ring. These double ringed nitrogen bases are called the purines. Now if you look at the other ones, cytosine, thymine, and then uracil, they have a single ring structure. And these single ring guys are called pyrimidines. So we got purines and pyrimidines. Now you might also recall, and we'll see this in a moment, that DNA contains A's, T's, G's, and C's. RNA contains A's, U's, G's, and C's. So uracil, like it says here, is only found in RNA, and thymine then technically is only found in DNA. So DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, this is a long double-stranded chain of nucleotides bound together, giving us a twisted helix structure like you see here. When we look at DNA, it will have only deoxyribose sugar from the last slide, and it will have only the bases A, T, G, and C, not U. All right, now the DNA is found in the main center of the cell, which in our cells is our nucleus, but in bacteria it's just kind of in the general central area. And this is the storage form of the blueprints for all your genetic info. So again, the way to build a protein is coded in your DNA. Now, this is a double-stranded molecule. Hopefully you remember then the base pairing rules, right? So the two strands of the DNA are not identical, but they are complementary strands. And what that means for us is that one side matches the other, but they're not the same, right? A always base pairs with T, and G always base pairs with C. Right, so don't forget about those base pairing rules that we see there. Now RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. This is generally just a single-stranded structure, like you see here. Just a single strand, sugar phosphate backbone, and the nitrogen bases here stick out from it. This will only include ribose sugar, and it will use A, U, G, and C. So note that when we use RNA, we're going to have uracil instead of thymine. Now, the base pairing rules otherwise are the same, but you generally are going to see this as a single strand. RNA comes in 3 different types, each of which has a different role in the cell. But while DNA is a storage form of genetic information, RNA is kind of a more active form. So you might remember you've got mRNA, which stands for messenger RNA. That's going to carry the genetic message out into the cell. You've got tRNA, which stands for transfer RNA, which plays a role in making proteins. And then you've got rRNA, which stands for ribosomal. And rRNA is just a structural piece of the ribosome, which is an organelle that you hopefully recall, but we'll cover in the next unit. Now, just to wrap up this whole unit, I did mention that we really want to kind of keep a nutrition kind of aspect here. And so what we want to do is look at these biomolecules we've learned, consider that they are sources of energy for us, which we talked about in Unit 1, and then ask, okay, what happens when we eat all these things? So in our body, what goes on when you eat something that's rich in carbohydrates or rich in proteins or rich in fats? And some of this you can kind of relate to what you eat. So when we look at their breakdown in terms of energy, we said that carbohydrates is our best source of energy. That's because the body can use it most efficiently and kind of in the best way. And so we'll give it a couple months, but we'll be back to that. We'll come back and take a look at why carbohydrates are our best source of energy once we've learned a bunch of other molecular details. But if we break down their energy that they would just give us directly, every gram of carbohydrate gives you about 4 kilocalories of energy. Every gram of protein gives you about 4 kilocalories of energy. But again, it's not quite as efficient for our cells to use. And then fat grams will actually give you 9 kilocalories of energy. But again, fats are a little dangerous. They're great for storing energy. Like you see, it stores more energy. But when you eat these, your body doesn't use it as well. So you end up storing some of that as fat. And so if you eat too much fat, you're going to get heavier. Now, when you eat carbohydrates, the first thing that you should notice is that you're going to get kind of sleepy. This is the body's reaction to an increase in blood sugar. So not only, like we talked about earlier, will an insulin release occur when you increase your blood sugar, but your body will get kind of sleepy. Basically what that's doing is it's trying to keep you from being too active so that it can divert blood flow to kind of digestive areas and take care of all those carbohydrates. Now, Broken down glucose is good for us. We break it down. We use it via cellular respiration to provide energy for our cells. And so if we use that carbohydrate right away, the body uses it, burns it, it's great. If we don't use those carbohydrates right away, your body's going to store them as glycogen, which is a readily available energy source. If you then exercise a little while later, that's the first place your body is going to go for energy, is it's going to break down those glycogen stores. Now, insulin will also be pushing excess sugar out of your bloodstream, like we talked about, into your muscle, your liver, or your adipose cells, which are your fat cells. And too much extra carbohydrate will lead to lipogenesis. So here we are, right? You've probably heard that you don't want to eat too many carbs. In fact, there's all those fad diets where you just cut out carbohydrates altogether. The reasoning behind that is if you have too much carbohydrate, your body will convert it into fat, which is what lipogenesis means. So lipogenesis, conversion to fat, right? Genesis, to make, lipo means fats. So conversion to fats for long-term storage. So if you eat carbs and you don't exercise, right? If you don't burn them right away, let's get rid of that. Like we have here, if you burn them right away, then you're fine. But if you don't, you're going to convert it into fat, and that can be bad. Now, the other thing is you got to watch out for those fad diets because, for instance, my father-in-law, he cuts out carbs because he thinks that's healthy. But what he does instead is he eats 4 times the amount of meat that he should instead of eating a bun around it. And he's getting a whole lot more fat from eating that way as well in his diet, and so that's not good either. So the best diets are those of moderation. A little bit of everything is good for you. Okay, now the second thing, when you eat lipids, like you would get from this donut burger at the fair, which I pulled this off the internet, don't worry, we did not purchase one of these and take a picture of it. Lipids are mostly going to get broken down or digested and then actually rebuilt for energy storage. It's so weird. It seems so backwards, but what you do is you eat the fat, you break it down, and then you put it back together and store it in your body. Seems like kind of a waste of energy to go through that process, but that's what the body does. So 80 to 85% of your energy stored is as fat. And notice this right here, a healthy body's energy. So you don't want to be 0% fat, right? You need to have some fat content in your body for you to really, really be healthy because that's the best way to store energy. Now, some fats will also go to cellular respiration and be used to generate cellular energy. Free fatty acids in your bloodstream can actually be converted right into a direct source of energy. But too much fat can be converted into ketone bodies. And if that sounds familiar, that was the thing I mentioned that you might end up with if you have too much sugar in your bloodstream, and that can lead to that sweet breath of somebody who's diabetic. Now, the liver making ketone bodies out of excess fats is a normal process. If you have a fatty meal, you're going to make some ketone bodies. The reason is because the body can actually excrete and get rid of ketone bodies. So this is sort of like an alternative to storing too much fat. So in other words, you kind of do this to keep from getting too fat. Now the problem is if you have too many ketone bodies, so big fatty meals way too often, then you could get into a condition called ketosis. Too many ketone bodies can lower the blood pH, and you can end up in a condition called ketoacidosis, which can be really, really dangerous. This is something that we see in someone who has really kind of excessive obesity. So please don't freak out if you had a donut burger. You're not going to go into ketoacidosis. But if we see somebody who's chronically obese and they don't lose the weight, they could start to flirt with this problem. Last thing then here is when you eat proteins. Protein's great for your diet. We could go on and on about proteins for a long time, but the best way to balance out things like diabetes or eating unhealthy or anything else is to recommend people eat a really good balanced diet with lots of protein. What's interesting is that protein has lots of benefits, but in an adult, most of the protein you eat gets digested and then excreted right back out. you don't need a whole lot of it in your body. Your body is making its own and things. So we often say that an adult is in a state of nitrogen balance. They excrete or get rid of about as much as they take in, and so you stay in balance. Now with kids it's different, right? With kids are growing. Kids need more protein. They need more protein to build muscle, to build bone, to increase the size of all their body structures. So we often say that children are in a negative balance because more amino acids are being utilized. So for them, kids are going to take in more than they will excrete, because they're going to take those amino acids in. They're going to eat a protein, digest it, and they're actually going to use those in the body versus just getting rid of them. So a lot of times we say that children are in a negative nitrogen balance or a negative amino balance, but that's a good thing, right? That sounds bad because it says negative, but it's a good thing. It means that they're actually using those proteins they eat to help them build structure and grow and develop. Now, for all of us, the essential amino acids are essential. We have to eat those, and so some of them you do keep in your body and use structurally. Some amino acids can also be converted into cellular energy via respiration, but that's kind of like your last resort. You don't really want to use protein for energy if you can get by with carbs and lipids for that. And you can think of this the same way in your body. Let's say you are starving. The first thing that happens if you're lost in the desert somewhere is you're going to break down your stored carbohydrates. Then you're going to start breaking down your stored fats. And so if you ever watch like the TV show Survivor or something, those people are getting really skinny because they're not eating enough and their body's breaking down the fat. Once they've gotten rid of most of the fat, the body will start to break down its muscles and other structures for energy. That's not good, right? We don't want to see that happening. So we prefer that the body's not necessarily breaking into its protein stores for energy, and for most of us, that's not going to happen. Now, last thing then to nucleic acids. Remember, mainly you digest them, you excrete them. They can be actually converted into products that can lead to some cellular energy, but it's just a tiny amount. Now, last thing I just want to say, and I think I mentioned it a couple minutes ago, the best diet is a diet of moderation, right? Not too much carbohydrate, not too much protein, not too much fat, and not too much food in general, and you're in good shape. That's the best thing to do. And if you talk to any nutritionist out there, they'll tell you that those fad diets and things are not the way to go. You should eat a balanced diet, you should not overeat, and you should exercise, and that's the best way to be healthy. Now, I'm not the best one to tell you that because I don't have the best diet and I don't exercise that much anymore with my kids, but for all of us, we could benefit from being a little more careful with our diet and getting more exercise. Okay, so I hope you learned something, and I'll see you guys in class.